The schoolhouse door slammed open just as Mirabelle Mercer turned to write the day's spelling lesson on the chalkboard. Cold January wind ripped through the one-room building, scattering papers and frightening the 12 children at their desks. A bay mare, eyes rolling white with terror, hooves clattering on the wooden floor, burst inside dragging a snapped lead rope. The horse reared, screaming, front hooves striking the air inches from the nearest child's head. Mirabelle did not think. She lunged forward, seized the dangling rope, and used every ounce of strength to pull the mare's head down and sideways, forcing the animal off balance. The horse stumbled, breath steaming, nostrils flared. Mirabelle held on, her arms screaming, boots sliding on the floor. "Get the children out," she shouted. The older students grabbed the younger ones and scrambled toward the back door. The mare bucked once, hard, and Mirabelle's grip slipped. She fell backward, striking the floorboards, vision darkening at the edges. Then a man's voice, low and commanding, cut through the chaos. "Easy now." The words were not loud, but they held absolute authority. Mirabelle blinked, gasping for air, and saw a tall figure step through the open doorway. He moved without hurry, each step deliberate, hands low and steady. The mare's ears swiveled toward him. He did not lunge or shout. He simply stood there, radiating calm, and reached for the trailing rope. The horse stamped once, then stilled. He gathered the rope smoothly, one hand rising to stroke the mare's lathered neck. The animal's breathing slowed. Mirabelle pushed herself upright, heart hammering, and stared at the stranger. He wore a plain work shirt, suspenders, and a heavy winter coat dusted with trail dirt. Dark brown hair, wind-blown and trimmed short. A short beard framing a face that looked both steady and dangerous. His eyes, dark and unreadable, flicked toward her. "You hurt?" he asked. His voice was rough-edged, but not unkind. Mirabelle shook her head, not trusting her voice. The man turned his attention back to the mare, murmuring something too low to hear, and led the animal toward the door. The children clustered near the back entrance, wide-eyed and silent. Mirabelle forced herself to stand, brushing dust from her burgundy dress, her hands trembling. "Who are you?" she managed. The man paused in the doorway, glancing back over his shoulder. "Mercer Granger," he said. Then he led the horse outside, leaving Mirabelle alone with the echo of his name and the cold wind still pouring through the open door. She learned his full story by accident, 3 days later, when she overheard 2 merchants arguing outside the general store. Mercer Granger, one of them hissed, has no right to show his face in Eagle Bend. That ranch of his is built on lies. The other merchant grunted. Railroad wants Larkspur Ranch. They'll get it too, once the court sees those papers. Mirabelle stood frozen beside a barrel of apples, her basket forgotten. Falsely accused, someone had whispered in church the previous Sunday. But she had not understood until now. The railroad claimed Granger's deed was forged. They wanted his land for the new western spur. If they succeeded, he would lose everything. Mirabelle's chest tightened. She had seen men destroyed by false accusations before. Her own father had died in a filthy territorial jail. Convicted of a stagecoach robbery he swore he never committed. Her older brother had vanished into outlaw country, rather than face the same fate. That was why Mirabelle had fled to Eagle Bend under her mother's maiden name, determined to live quietly, teach school, and never let anyone discover the Mercer name was tied to blood and scandal. Now here was another man, facing another lie, and she could not shake the memory of his steady voice, calming that terrified horse. She found him 2 mornings later at the livery stable, repairing a broken harness strap. The building smelled of leather, hay, and horse sweat. Mercer glanced up as she approached, his expression guarded. "Miss Mercer," he said, straightening. His tone was neutral, but his eyes tracked her movements with the same quiet intensity he had shown the runaway mare. "I wanted to thank you," Mirabelle said. She kept her voice even, professional. "You saved my students. And possibly me." Mercer shook his head. Horse was spooked by a rattler near the water trough. Not her fault. He returned his attention to the harness, fingers working the leather with practiced ease. "That was not what I meant," Mirabelle said quietly. She took a breath. "I heard what the railroad is doing." The accusation. Mercer's hands stilled. His jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his short beard. "You should not listen to gossip, Miss Mercer." "It was not gossip," she replied. "It was 2 men who believe you are guilty." Mercer set down the harness and faced her fully. "And what do you believe?" The question was direct, almost a challenge. Mirabelle met his gaze without flinching. "I believe," she said slowly, "that a man who can calm a frightened animal without force is not the kind of man who forges documents to steal land." Mercer studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not suspicion, exactly, but wariness giving way to reluctant curiosity. "Why does it matter to you?" he asked. "Because I know what it feels like to run from a lie," Mirabelle said before she could stop herself. The words hung in the cold air between them. She had not meant to reveal even that much. Mercer's gaze sharpened, but he did not press. Instead, he picked up the harness again, his voice dropping lower. "The deed is real. My father bought that land in '68, paid in gold coin, registered it proper. But the railroad claims the signature was forged, and they have a judge in their pocket." Mirabelle's hands tightened on her basket handle. "Can you prove it?" Mercer's mouth twisted into something that was not quite a smile. "Only if I can find the original surveyor who witnessed the sale. He moved east 5 years ago. I have no idea where." "Then find him," Mirabelle said. Mercer looked at her again, longer this time, as if trying to understand why a schoolteacher he barely knew would care. "I intend to," he said quietly. "But the hearing is in 6 weeks. If I cannot produce proof by then, the ranch is gone." The following week brought the first dust storm of the season. Mirabelle dismissed school early, watching the horizon darken to a sickly yellow-brown. The children scattered toward their homes, and she secured the shutters, her hands moving quickly. By the time she stepped outside, the wind had risen to a howl, and visibility had dropped to mere yards. She pulled her coat tight and started toward the boarding house where she rented a small room. Halfway there, the storm hit in full. Dust filled her mouth, her nose, her eyes. She stumbled, choking, unable to see the road. Then a hand closed around her arm, firm and unyielding. "This way," Mercer's voice said in her ear. He pulled her forward, guiding her through the blinding grit. She had no choice but to trust him. They reached a building, and he shoved the door open, hauling her inside. Mirabelle collapsed against the wall, coughing violently, tears streaming down her dust-caked face. Mercer slammed the door shut and latched it. The roar of the storm became muffled. Mirabelle blinked, trying to clear her vision, and realized they were inside the old land office, abandoned since the county seat moved to Silver Flats. Dust sifted through cracks in the walls, but the interior was dim and relatively still. "You all right?" Mercer asked. His own face was streaked with dirt, his eyes red-rimmed. Mirabelle nodded, still catching her breath. "Thank you." Mercer moved to a broken desk and dragged it against the door for extra bracing. "Storm like this can last hours. We are stuck." Mirabelle sank onto a dusty wooden crate, her legs shaking from exertion and adrenaline. "How did you find me?" "I was heading to the stable. Saw you stumble." He wiped his face with his sleeve, leaving streaks. "You should not have been out in that." "I did not expect it to move so fast," Mirabelle admitted. She looked around the abandoned office, noting the empty shelves and scattered papers. This was where her father's deed had been recorded, she realized with a jolt. Before the county moved everything. Before the lies began. Mercer settled on the floor opposite her, back against the wall, legs stretched out. He was watching her again with that steady, unreadable gaze. "You are not from Eagle Bend originally." It was not a question. "No," Mirabelle said carefully. "I came here 2 years ago to teach." "Where from?" She hesitated. The storm howled outside, rattling the shutters. "Kansas," she said finally. "Small town. Nothing worth mentioning." Mercer tilted his head slightly. "You are lying." Mirabelle's breath caught. "Excuse me. Your hands," he said quietly. "You clench them when you are hiding something. I noticed it at the stable." Mirabelle forced herself to relax her grip on her skirt. "That is quite an accusation from a man who barely knows me." Mercer's expression did not change. "I know you stepped in front of a runaway horse to protect children. I know you sought me out to offer support when everyone else in this town thinks I am a liar and a cheat. And I know you just said you understand what it feels like to run from a lie." He leaned forward slightly. "So yes, Miss Mercer, I think you are hiding something. And I think it matters." Mirabelle stared at him, heart pounding. The storm was a constant roar beyond the walls, sealing them in this dusty tomb of old records and broken dreams. She could walk away from this conversation, refuse to answer, and he would let her. But something in his eyes, that same steady intensity that had calmed a terrified horse, made her want to trust him. "My real name," she said slowly, "is Mirabelle Stanton." Mercer went very still. "Stanton, the stagecoach gang." "I had nothing to do with that," Mirabelle said quickly. "Neither did my father. He was convicted on false testimony, died in jail 6 months later. My brother ran rather than hang for crimes he did not commit. I changed my name and came here to start over. If anyone in Eagle Bend learns who I am, I will lose everything." Mercer was silent for a long moment, his gaze never leaving hers. Then he exhaled slowly. "So we are both living under a shadow." Mirabelle's throat tightened. "Yes, and if the railroad wins, you will lose your ranch. If my past is discovered, I will lose my position, my home, my entire life here." Mercer nodded slowly. "Then we both understand what is at stake." The storm shook the building, and dust sifted down from the rafters. Mirabelle wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite her coat. "Why are you not angry that I lied?" "Because," Mercer said quietly, "I know the difference between a lie that protects and a lie that destroys. You are not hurting anyone by hiding your name. The railroad is trying to destroy me with a lie that serves their greed. There is no comparison. Mirabelle looked at him, really looked, and saw the exhaustion beneath his steady exterior. The weight of fighting alone. "How long have you been searching for the surveyor?" she asked. 3 months. Every lead turns to dust. Mercer rubbed his face. "I am running out of time, Miss Mercer. Or should I call you Miss Stanton?" Mirabelle managed a faint smile. Mercer is safer. He returned the smile, just barely, and for the first time she saw a flicker of warmth in his dark eyes. Then, Mercer it is. The storm raged on, and they sat in the near darkness. Two people carrying secrets too heavy to bear alone, and Mirabelle felt the first fragile thread of connection pull tight between them. The storm broke near sunset, leaving Eagle Bend coated in a fine layer of grit. Mercer walked Mirabelle back to the boarding house, neither of them speaking much, but the silence felt different now. Less guarded. 2 days later, a letter arrived at the school. Mirabelle recognized Mercer's handwriting on the envelope, blocky and precise. Inside was a single folded page. "Miss Mercer, I have a lead on the surveyor. He may be in Dodge City. I leave tomorrow. If I do not return in 2 weeks, assume the worst. Thank you for your honesty. M.G." Mirabelle read the note 3 times, her chest tight. He was going alone into hostile territory, chasing a man who might not even exist anymore, with no guarantee of success. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her desk drawer. That night, she lay awake in her narrow boarding house bed, listening to the wind scrape against the window, and admitted to herself what she had been trying to ignore. She cared about Mercer Granger. Cared in a way that went far beyond sympathy for a fellow victim of injustice. It was dangerous, foolish. She had built her entire life in Eagle Bend, on the foundation of invisibility and caution. Getting involved with a man embroiled in a public legal battle was the opposite of safe. But when she closed her eyes, she saw his steady gaze in the dust-choked office, heard his voice saying, "I know the difference between a lie that protects and a lie that destroys." Mercer returned 12 days later, empty-handed and exhausted. Mirabelle saw him ride into town just as she was locking the schoolhouse for the evening. He dismounted stiffly, his coat and hat thick with trail dust, and tied his horse outside the saloon. She crossed the street before she could talk herself out of it. He looked up as she approached, and she saw the defeat in his eyes before he masked it. "No luck," she said quietly. Mercer shook his head. "Surveyor died last spring. Cholera. His widow had no records, no memory of the Larkspur transaction." He pulled off his gloves, hands raw and blistered from hard riding. "It is over, Miss Mercer. The hearing is in 3 weeks, and I have nothing." Mirabelle's heart sank. There must be another way. Mercer's laugh was bitter. "If there is, I have not found it." He started to turn away, then stopped. "I appreciate your concern, but you should distance yourself from me now. When the railroad takes the ranch, anyone associated with me will be tainted by the loss." "I do not care about that," Mirabelle said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. Mercer's gaze snapped back to her, startled. "You should," he said quietly. "You have a reputation to protect, a position, a future. I have none of those things anymore. Then let me help you fight for them, Mirabelle replied. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You are not alone in this, Mercer. Whether you want my help or not, you have it. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to name. Why? He asked. Why risk yourself for me? Because, Mirabelle said, meeting his eyes, you did not have to pull me out of that storm. You did not have to tell me the truth about your situation. You did not have to treat my secret with respect. You chose to help me when you had every reason to walk away. I am choosing the same. Mercer stared at her, and for a moment the noise of the street faded. The clatter of wagons and the voices of passing townspeople becoming distant and unimportant. Then he exhaled slowly, some of the tension draining from his shoulders. All right, he said. But if this goes badly, you leave. You protect yourself first. Agreed. Mirabelle nodded, even though she had no intention of keeping that promise. What do we do next? Mercer glanced toward the saloon, then back at her. There is one option I have been avoiding. My father kept a strongbox buried on the ranch. He told me once it held important papers, but I never looked. I was 17 when he died, and I was too angry and grief-stricken to care about old documents. If there is a copy of the deed, or any proof of the original transaction, it would be there. Why have you not checked before now? Mirabelle asked. Because, Mercer said quietly. Opening that box means facing everything I have been running from for 15 years. Mirabelle understood that kind of avoidance too well. Then it is time, she said gently. And I will go with you. They rode out to Larkspur Ranch the next morning before dawn. Mirabelle had told the boarding house matron she was visiting a sick student's family. It was a thin excuse, but it would hold for a day. The ranch lay 5 miles west of Eagle Bend, nestled in a shallow valley with a creek running along the southern boundary. The house was small but well built, log walls chinked tight against the winter wind. A barn, a corral, and a scattering of outbuildings completed the picture. Mercer dismounted and helped Mirabelle down from her borrowed mare. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. Where are your hands? Mirabelle asked. Mercer's mouth tightened. I let them go 2 weeks ago. Could not pay wages with the ranch in limbo. It is just me now. He led her toward the barn, his boots crunching on frozen ground. The strongbox is buried under the tack room floor. My father was careful, paranoid even. He did not trust banks or lawyers. Inside the barn, Mercer lit a lantern and moved a stack of saddle blankets aside, revealing a loose floorboard. He pried it up with a knife, then pulled out a second board, and a third. Beneath was a shallow depression in the dirt, and inside it, a battered iron strongbox secured with a rusted lock. Mercer stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he took a deep breath, retrieved a pry bar from a nearby shelf, and forced the lock. The box opened with a screech of protesting metal. Inside were papers, yellowed and brittle, tied with string. A worn leather journal, a small cloth pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. Mercer lifted out the papers carefully and untied the string. Mirabelle leaned closer, lantern light flickering over the faded ink. The top document was a bill of sale, dated 1868, signed by one Samuel Granger, and witnessed by a surveyor named Thomas Brennan. Mercer's breath caught. This is it. This is the original. Mirabelle scanned the paper, her pulse quickening. The signature matched the one on the disputed deed. But then her gaze snagged on a detail at the bottom. A second witness line she had almost missed. Eleanor Voss, it read. Witness to transaction and payment. Who is Eleanor Voss? Mirabel asked. Mercer frowned, shaking his head. I have no idea. I have never heard that name. Mirabel's mind raced. If this Eleanor Voss is still alive, she could testify. She saw the payment, saw your father's sign. That would corroborate the deed. Mercer set the paper down carefully and picked up the journal, flipping through brittle pages. His father's handwriting, cramped and precise. Entries about cattle purchases, weather, expenses. Then, near the back, a longer entry dated December 1868. Sold 6 steers to E. Voss of the Golden Bell. She witnessed the land purchase today. Decent woman. Fair hand at cards. Mercer looked up, his eyes sharp. The Golden Bell. That is a ranch north of here, near the territorial line. Still operating, last I heard. Then we ride there, Mirabel said immediately. If Eleanor Voss is alive, we find her. If she is dead, we find her family, her records, anything that proves she was real and that she witnessed the sale. Mercer stared at her, something like hope beginning to crack through the exhaustion in his face. The hearing is in 3 weeks. If we leave now, we might have time. Mirabel nodded. Then, we leave now. They packed supplies quickly, Mercer moving with swift efficiency. Mirabel changed into a split riding skirt she had borrowed, far more practical than her schoolteacher dresses. By mid-morning they were on the trail north, 2 horses, 2 bedrolls, and a saddlebag full of jerky, hardtack, and hope. The land opened up around them, rolling grassland broken by rocky outcrops and dry washes. The sky was pale and cold, promising more wind, but no snow. Mercer set a steady pace, not pushing the horses but not wasting time either. Mirabel matched him, her body protesting the long ride, but her determination holding firm. They spoke little during the day, saving their energy, but when they stopped to rest the horses at midday, Mercer finally broke the silence. You did not have to do this. Mirabel looked at him across the small fire they had built in the shelter of a rock overhang. I know. So why? She considered her answer carefully. Because, she said slowly, I spent 2 years hiding, playing it safe, keeping my head down. I thought that was survival. But watching you fight for what is yours, even when everyone else has given up on you, made me realize I was not surviving. I was just disappearing. Mercer's gaze was intent, unblinking. And now? Now I choose to be seen, Mirabel said quietly. At least by one person. Mercer held her gaze for a long moment, and something shifted in the air between them, fragile and electric. Then he looked away, jaw tight. You should know, he said, voice low, that if this goes badly, if the railroad wins, I will have nothing. No land, no home, no future. I will be a drifter with a tainted name. Mirabel's throat tightened. And you should know, she replied, that if my past is discovered, I will be ruined. No respectable town will hire a school teacher with outlaw blood. We are both risking everything. Mercer looked back at her, and this time he did not look away. Then we risk it together. The words hung in the cold air, a promise neither of them dared to name. Mirabel nodded, her chest tight, and busied herself with repacking the saddlebags. But her hands were trembling, and she knew Mercer saw. They reached the Golden Bell Ranch at dusk on the second day. The place was larger than Larkspur, with a sprawling main house, 2 barns, and a bunkhouse that showed signs of active occupation. Smoke rose from the chimney. Mercer and Mirabelle dismounted at the gate, and a lean, gray-haired man in a heavy coat emerged from the barn. "Help you," he called. "We are looking for Eleanor Voss," Mercer said. "Is she here?" The man's expression shifted, guarded. "Who is asking?" "Mercer Granger." "This is Miss Mercer. We need to speak with Mrs. Voss about a land transaction from 1868. The man studied them for a long moment, then nodded toward the house. "She is inside. But she does not take kindly to strangers stirring up old business. Be respectful." They approached the house, and the man knocked twice before opening the door. A woman's voice, sharp and clear, called from within. "What is it, Caleb?" "Visitors, ma'am. Say they need to talk about old land business." There was a pause, then the sound of a chair scraping. "Show them in." Inside, the house was warm and cluttered with the comfortable chaos of a working ranch. Eleanor Voss sat in a high-backed chair near the fire, a thick quilt across her lap. She was old, perhaps 70, with steel-gray hair pinned in a tight bun and eyes that were still keen and bright. She looked Mercer up and down, then Mirabelle, and her mouth thinned. "You are Samuel Granger's boy." Mercer removed his hat. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor gestured to 2 chairs. "Sit. Tell me why you are here." Mercer explained quickly, laying out the railroad's claim, the forged deed accusation, the hearing. He produced the bill of sale from his coat and handed it to Eleanor. "Your name is on this as a witness. I need you to testify that the transaction was legitimate." Eleanor held the paper close to the firelight, squinting. Then she set it down on her lap and looked at Mercer with an expression that was equal parts shrewd and sad. "I remember this. Your father paid in gold coin, right here at this table. Tom Brennan was there, and so was I. Samuel was a hard man, but he was honest. This deed is real." Relief flooded Mercer's face. "Then you will testify." Eleanor's mouth twisted. "I would. But the railroad has already been here." Mirabelle's stomach dropped. "What?" "2 men came by a week ago. Offered me $500 to stay quiet. Said if I refused, they would make life difficult for my grandson, who works the rail line in Kansas City." Eleanor's eyes were hard. "I sent them away. But they made it clear that if I testify, there will be consequences." Mercer's hands tightened on the brim of his hat. "I cannot ask you to put your family at risk. But without your testimony, I have nothing." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, then at Mirabelle. "And who are you in all this, girl?" Mirabelle met her gaze steadily. "A friend. Someone who believes the truth matters more than railroad money." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You are lying, not about believing in the truth, but about who you are." Mirabelle's breath caught. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "I have been reading people my whole life, child. You carry a secret, and it weighs on you. If you want my help, you tell me the truth." Mirabelle glanced at Mercer, who gave a tiny nod. She took a breath. "My real name is Mirabelle Stanton. My father was convicted of a crime he did not commit. I changed my name to escape the scandal. If that becomes known, I will lose everything. But I am here because Mercer deserves justice, and I refuse to let the powerful crush the innocent anymore. Eleanor studied her, then nodded slowly. Good. Honesty is rare. She turned back to Mercer. I will testify. But you need to understand, boy, that the railroad does not play fair. If I stand up in that courtroom, they will come after me, after you, and after anyone else who gets in their way. Are you prepared for that? Mercer's jaw set. Yes, ma'am. Then so am I. Eleanor rose, leaning on a cane. Now get out of here and let an old woman sleep. You have a long ride back, and I need to prepare. Mercer and Mirabel stood, thanking her, and Eleanor waved them off. But as they reached the door, she called out, "One more thing." Mirabel turned back. Eleanor's expression was softer now, almost amused. "That man of yours. You love him yet?" Mirabel's face flushed. "He is not my man." Eleanor snorted. "Not yet. But you will. I see the way he looks at you when you are not watching. And I see the way you lean toward him like a flower to the sun. Do not waste time pretending otherwise. Life is too short." Mirabel fled the house, her face burning, and found Mercer waiting by the horses. He glanced at her, concerned. What did she say? "Nothing," Mirabel managed. "Just wishing us luck." Mercer did not look convinced, but he let it drop. They mounted and rode into the cold night, and Mirabel could not shake Eleanor's words. "You love him yet?" She was not ready to answer that question. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore with every mile. They camped that night in a dry wash a few miles from the Golden Bell, too exhausted to ride farther. Mercer built a small fire, and they ate in near silence, the tension of the day finally catching up. Mirabel wrapped herself in her blanket and sat close to the flames, watching sparks spiral into the dark sky. Mercer sat across from her, his face shadowed, hat pulled low. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming with me, for convincing Eleanor, for all of it." "You do not have to thank me," Mirabel replied. "Yes, I do." Mercer looked up, his eyes catching the firelight. "You put yourself at risk for me, again and again. I do not take that lightly." Mirabel's throat tightened. "What will you do if the railroad wins anyway?" Mercer was silent for a moment. "Start over. Find work somewhere. Try to rebuild." He paused. "But if I lose the ranch, I lose the only piece of my father I have left. And that will hurt more than anything else." Mirabel understood that kind of loss. "When my father died," she said softly, "I thought the pain would kill me. I thought I would never feel safe again. But hiding did not make it better. It just made me smaller." Mercer's gaze was steady, unreadable. "And now I am here, risking everything, and I feel alive for the first time in 2 years." Mercer held her gaze, and something in his expression shifted. "Mirabel," he said, and his voice was rough, careful. "If we survive this, if we win, there is something I need to say." Mirabel's heart hammered. "What?" But he shook his head. "Not yet. Not until it is over." She wanted to argue, to demand he say it now, but the look in his eyes stopped her. There was fear there, buried deep. Fear of loss, of hope, of wanting something he could not afford to lose. So she nodded, and they sat in the firelight, the space between them electric with everything unspoken. They returned to Eagle Bend 4 days before the hearing. Mirabelle resumed her teaching duties, and Mercer holed up at the ranch, preparing his case. But the town had not been idle. Mirabelle noticed it immediately, the way conversation stopped when she walked by, the sidelong glances from the mercantile clerk, the cold silence from the boarding house matron. On the 3rd day, the pastor's wife stopped her outside the schoolhouse. "Miss Mercer, I feel it is my duty to warn you. There is talk about you spending time with Mr. Granger, about you riding out to his ranch unchaperoned." Mirabelle kept her expression neutral. "I have been helping a friend with a legal matter." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. A young woman of good character does not associate with a man facing such serious accusations. You are jeopardizing your reputation. "With respect," Mirabelle said quietly, "I value integrity over reputation." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Then, you are a fool." She swept away, leaving Mirabelle standing alone in the cold street. That evening, the boarding house matron called Mirabelle into her parlor. "I am sorry, Miss Mercer, but I must ask you to find other accommodations by the end of the month. Several of my other tenants have expressed discomfort with your association." Mirabelle's chest tightened. "I see." The matron's expression was sympathetic but firm. "You are a good tenant, but I cannot afford to lose business." Mirabelle nodded stiffly and returned to her room. She sat on the narrow bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, and felt the walls closing in. This was what she had feared from the beginning. Visibility meant vulnerability. Standing with Mercer meant standing in the line of fire. But as she sat there, anger replaced fear. She had done nothing wrong. She had helped an innocent man fight for justice. If that made her unsuitable for polite society, then polite society could burn. She grabbed her coat and walked to the ranch. Mercer opened the door at her knock, surprise flickering across his face. "Mirabelle, what happened?" "I have been evicted," Mirabelle said flatly. "Well, given notice. And the town has decided I am a scandal." Mercer's expression darkened. "Because of me. Because I chose to help you. There is a difference." She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, and Mercer closed the door behind her. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I never wanted this to touch you." Mirabelle turned to face him, her anger finally spilling over. "Do you think I care what they think? Do you think I regret helping you?" Mercer stared at her, caught off guard. No. "But—" "Then stop apologizing," Mirabelle snapped. "I made my choice. I knew the risks. If the price of doing the right thing is losing a rented room and the approval of people who care more about gossip than truth, then I will pay it." Mercer took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "Where will you go?" "I do not know," Mirabelle admitted, her anger deflating into exhaustion. "I have a little savings. I can find another town, another position. Start over again." "You should not have to," Mercer said, and his voice was tight with frustration. "You should not have to run because of me." Mirabelle looked at him, really looked, and saw the same exhaustion, the same weight of fighting alone. "I am not running," she said quietly. "Not this time. Mercer's jaw tightened. Then stay here, at the ranch. It is not proper, but I do not care anymore. Stay until the hearing is over, until you know where you stand. Mirabel's breath caught. Mercer, I cannot. Why not? Because, Mirabel said, her voice shaking, if I stay here, if I let myself get any closer to you, I will not be able to leave when this is over. And it will be over, one way or another. Mercer closed the remaining distance between them, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders gently. Then do not leave. Stay, no matter what happens. Mirabel stared up at him, her heart hammering. What are you saying? I am saying, Mercer said, his voice rough and low, that I do not care about the ranch as much as I care about you. I am saying that for the first time in 15 years, I want something more than just survival. I want a future. And I want it with you. Mirabel's breath stopped. The world narrowed to his face, his hands on her shoulders, the firelight flickering behind him. She should say no. She should protect herself. Walk away. Rebuild somewhere safe. But Eleanor's voice echoed in her mind. Life is too short. And Mirabel was so tired of being afraid. She reached up and touched his face, her palm against his bearded jaw. I want that too, she whispered. Mercer exhaled, a sound like relief and surrender. And then he kissed her. It was not gentle. It was desperate and fierce. Months of loneliness and fear and hope pouring into that single moment. Mirabel kissed him back with everything she had, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mercer rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said again, quieter now. Please. All right, Mirabel whispered. I will stay. The hearing was held in the Eagle Bend courthouse 2 days later. The building was small and crowded, packed with townspeople curious to see the outcome. Mirabel sat in the back row, her hands clenched in her lap. Mercer sat at the defendant's table, his face calm, but his shoulders tight. Across from him, the railroad's lawyer, a sleek man in an expensive suit, shuffled papers with the confidence of someone who had already won. The judge, an older man with a gray beard, called the court to order. The railroad presented its case first. The lawyer argued smoothly, presenting documents, expert testimony, and a handwriting analyst who claimed the signature on Mercer's deed was inconsistent with known samples of Samuel Granger's writing. It was devastating. Mirabel watched Mercer's jaw tighten, but he did not flinch. Then it was Mercer's turn. He stood, presenting the original bill of sale, the journal entry, and a written statement from Eleanor Voss. The judge examined the documents carefully, then looked up. Where is Mrs. Voss? Why is she not here to testify in person? Before Mercer could answer, the courtroom doors opened. Eleanor Voss walked in, leaning on her cane, her grandson Caleb at her side. She made her way to the front, every eye in the room following her. I am here, Your Honor, she said clearly, and I am ready to testify. The railroad lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. This witness was not disclosed. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes sharp. That is because your people tried to bribe me to stay home. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel. Order! Mrs. Voss, approach the stand. Eleanor took the oath and sat down, her posture straight despite her age. She recounted the transaction in detail, her memory clear and precise. The date, the amount, the witnesses. She described Samuel Granger counting out gold coins on her kitchen table, Tom Brennan signing the witness line, and her own signature added afterward. "I was there," she said firmly. "I saw it all. That deed is legitimate, and anyone who says otherwise is either mistaken or lying." The railroad lawyer tried to discredit her, questioning her memory, her motives, but Eleanor was unshakable. Every attempt to trip her up only made her testimony stronger. By the time she stepped down, the mood in the courtroom had shifted. The judge called for a recess, then returned an hour later. He looked at Mercer, then at the railroad lawyer. "I find the testimony of Mrs. Voss credible and corroborated by the documentation presented. The deed is legitimate. The railroad's claim is dismissed." The courtroom erupted again, this time in a mix of cheers and outraged protests. Mirabelle felt tears prick her eyes. Mercer turned, his gaze finding hers across the crowded room, and the relief and hope in his face nearly broke her. He had won. They had won. But as Mirabelle stood to leave, she saw the railroad lawyer speaking urgently to a man in the back row. The man glanced at her, then at Mercer, and his expression was cold and calculating. The fight, Mirabelle realized with a sinking heart, might not be over. That night, Mercer and Mirabelle celebrated quietly at the ranch. No whiskey, no dancing. Just relief and exhaustion, and the knowledge that they had survived the first battle. But Mirabelle could not shake the image of that man's cold stare. "Tell me the truth," she said as they sat by the fire. "Is it really over?" Mercer's expression darkened. The railroad lost in court, but men like that do not give up easily. They will try something else. Mirabelle's stomach tightened. What kind of something else? I do not know. But I will be ready. He looked at her, his gaze steady. "You should leave, Mirabelle. Go somewhere safe. Start fresh. This fight is mine, not yours." Mirabelle shook her head. "We already had this conversation. I am staying." Mercer reached for her hand, his grip warm and firm. "Then we face it together. Whatever comes next." Mirabelle nodded, squeezing his hand back. Together. But that night, as she lay in the small guest room Mercer had prepared for her, she could not sleep. Something was coming. She felt it like a storm on the horizon, heavy and inevitable. The blow came 3 days later. Mirabelle was walking to the schoolhouse when a stranger stepped out of the alley beside the general store. "Miss Stanton," he said. Mirabelle froze. The man was young, maybe 30, with a thin face and cold eyes. He wore a long coat and a low-brimmed hat. "We need to talk." "Who are you?" Mirabelle managed, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "A friend," the man said. "Someone who knows your real name, knows about your father, knows about your brother, who is wanted in 3 territories for armed robbery." Mirabelle's blood turned to ice. "What do you want?" The man smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "The railroad wants Mercer Granger gone, one way or another. You are going to help make that happen." "I will do no such thing," Mirabelle said. The man's smile widened. "Then I will make sure every newspaper between here and Kansas City knows exactly who you are." I will make sure the good people of Eagle Bend learn that their respectable schoolteacher is the daughter and sister of outlaws. You will lose your position, your home, and any chance of a future. Unless, Mirabelle's hands shook, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. Unless what? Unless you convince Mercer Granger to sign over his deed to the railroad. Voluntarily. Tell him you will leave him if he does not. Tell him whatever you need to. Just get him to sign. Mirabelle's breath came short and fast. And if I refuse, then your life is over, Miss Stanton. And Granger's too. We will make sure of that. The man tipped his hat. You have 3 days. Make the right choice. He walked away, disappearing into the crowd, and Mirabelle stood frozen in the cold street, her world crumbling around her. She did not go to the schoolhouse. She did not go to the ranch. She walked to the edge of town and sat on a low stone wall, staring at the empty prairie, her mind racing. If she told Mercer the truth, he would refuse to sign. He would fight, and the railroad would destroy him. If she convinced him to sign, he would lose everything he had fought for. And if she did nothing, both of them would be ruined. There was no good choice, only degrees of loss. She sat there until the sun began to set, the cold seeping into her bones, and finally admitted the truth she had been avoiding. She loved Mercer Granger, loved him with a ferocity that terrified her. And because she loved him, she could not let him sacrifice himself for her. There was only one way to protect him. She had to leave, alone. She returned to the ranch after dark. Mercer met her at the door, concern etched into his face. Where have you been? I was worried. Mirabelle forced herself to meet his eyes. I need to talk to you. They sat by the fire, and Mirabelle took a deep breath. I am leaving Eagle Bend. Tomorrow, on the morning train. Mercer stared at her. What? Why? Because staying here is not safe for me anymore, Mirabelle said, the lie bitter on her tongue. The town knows about us. My reputation is destroyed. If I stay, I will never find work again. I need to start over, somewhere far away. Mercer shook his head. Then I will come with you. We will start over together. No, Mirabelle said sharply. You cannot leave the ranch. Not now. Not after everything you fought for. Mercer's jaw tightened. I do not care about the ranch if you are not here. Mirabelle's chest ached, but she forced herself to continue. I care. I care that you fought for it. I care that it is your father's legacy. And I will not let you throw that away from me. She stood, her hands shaking. I am sorry, Mercer, but this is my choice. Mercer rose, crossing to her in 2 strides. His hands framed her face, forcing her to look at him. You are lying. I can see it. Whatever is happening, whatever you are afraid of, tell me. We face it together. Remember. Mirabelle's resolve cracked, tears spilling over. I cannot, she whispered. If I tell you, you will do something reckless, and I cannot lose you. Mercer's expression was raw, desperate. You are not losing me. You are leaving me. There is a difference. Mirabelle pulled away, her heart breaking. The train leaves at 8 in the morning. Do not come to the station. Please. She fled to the guest room before he could stop her, locked the door, and collapsed on the bed, sobbing into the pillow. She did not sleep. At dawn, She packed her few belongings and slipped out of the house while Mercer was still in his room. She walked to town, the cold morning air biting her face, and bought a ticket for the eastbound train. The platform was nearly empty. She stood there, clutching her small traveling bag, and waited. The train arrived at 8 sharp, steam hissing, engine rumbling. Mirabelle climbed aboard and found a seat by the window. The conductor called for final boarding. The train lurched, beginning to pull away from the station. And then she saw him, Mercer, running down the platform, coatless, his face desperate. "Mirabelle," he shouted, "do not do this." She pressed her hand against the window, tears streaming down her face. The train picked up speed. Mercer kept pace, his boots pounding the platform. He reached the end and stopped, chest heaving, and their eyes met through the glass. "I love you," he shouted, his voice raw. "Whatever is happening, I love you." Mirabelle choked on a sob. The train rounded a bend, and he disappeared from view. She collapsed back against the seat, her body shaking, and knew she had just made the worst mistake of her life. The train had been rolling for less than an hour when Mirabelle made her decision. She could not do this. She could not run. Not again. Not from the one person who had ever made her feel like she belonged. She stood, grabbed her bag, and made her way to the conductor. "I need to get off at the next stop." The conductor frowned. "Next stop is 20 miles east, ma'am." "No town, just a water tower." "I do not care," Mirabelle said. "I need off." The conductor shrugged. "Your ticket." The train slowed at the water tower, and Mirabelle climbed down into the empty prairie. The train pulled away, leaving her standing alone in the cold wind. She turned west and started walking. It took her 4 hours to walk back to Eagle Bend. Her feet were blistered, her dress covered in dust. But she did not stop. She went straight to the ranch. Mercer was in the barn, mucking out stalls, his movements sharp and angry. He looked up as she entered, and his expression cycled through shock, hope, and guarded wariness. "You came back." "I should never have left," Mirabelle said, her voice shaking. "I lied to you. I was not leaving because of my reputation. I was leaving because the railroad threatened to expose my past unless I convinced you to sign over the deed. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just running again." Mercer set down the pitchfork, his expression darkening. "They threatened you." Mirabelle nodded. "A man approached me 3 days ago. Said if I did not make you sign, they would destroy both of us. I thought leaving was the only way to keep you safe." Mercer crossed to her in 3 long strides. His hands gripped her arms, not hard, but firm. "Listen to me. I do not care what they threaten. I do not care if they expose your past, burn down my ranch, or run us both out of town. I am not signing that deed, and I am not letting you go. Do you understand?" Mirabelle stared at him, her heart pounding. "But they will ruin us." "Then we will be ruined together," Mercer said fiercely. "I meant what I said on that platform. I love you, Mirabelle. I have loved you since the day you walked into that stable and told me you believed in my innocence. I am not losing you because of threats from cowards who hide behind money and power." Mirabelle's tears spilled over again, but this time they were not tears of despair. "I love you too," she whispered. "I am so sorry I ran." Mercer pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her tightly. "You came back." That is all that matters. They stood there, holding each other in the dusty barn, and Mirabelle felt the last of her fear drain away. She was not running anymore. She was home. The railroad made one final attempt 2 weeks later. They sent the same man who had threatened Mirabelle, along with 2 hired enforcers, to Larkspur Ranch. Mercer met them in the yard, rifle in hand. Mirabelle stood beside him, equally armed. "We are not signing," Mercer said flatly. The man's smile was thin. "Then we will take it." "You can try," Mercer replied. "But I have 2 witnesses who will testify to attempted extortion. Eleanor Voss and her grandson. And I have a judge who is already angry about your tactics. Walk away now, or I will make sure every newspaper in the territory knows how the railroad tried to steal land through threats and bribery." The man hesitated, then glanced at his enforcers. They looked uncomfortable. One of them shifted his weight and muttered something about not signing up for this. The man's jaw tightened. "This is not over." "Yes," Mercer said quietly. "It is." The men left. Mirabelle lowered her rifle, her hands shaking. "It is really over?" she asked. Mercer set his rifle down and pulled her close. "It is really over." She laughed, the sound half relief, half disbelief, and kissed him hard. They stood there in the cold yard, the ranch spread out around them, and Mirabelle felt the future open up, like the wide prairie sky. They were married in the spring, in a quiet ceremony at Eleanor Voss's ranch. The old woman stood as witness, grinning like a cat. "I told you," she said to Mirabelle afterward. "You did," Mirabelle admitted, laughing. Eleanor patted her hand. "You are a good match. He is steady, and you are brave. Together, you will be fine." Mirabelle and Mercer returned to Larkspur Ranch, and Mirabelle took a position teaching at a new school 2 towns over, where no one knew her past, and no one cared. The ranch thrived. Mercer hired back his hands, expanded the herd, and worked from dawn to dusk with the quiet determination Mirabelle loved. And at night, they sat by the fire, talking about the future, about children, about dreams they had thought lost forever. Mirabelle never regretted staying. She never regretted choosing love over safety, truth over hiding. Because in the end, she had learned the most important lesson of all. Home was not a place. It was the person who stood beside you when the world tried to tear you down. And she had found hers. The months that followed were not easy, but they were good. Mirabelle and Mercer rebuilt their lives together, piece by piece. The town eventually accepted them, or at least stopped whispering. Eleanor Voss became a regular visitor, always arriving with sharp advice and sharper coffee. Mirabelle's brother sent a letter in June, the first in 3 years. He had settled in California, found work on a ranch, and was trying to go straight. Mirabelle wrote back, telling him about Mercer, about the ranch, about choosing to stop running. She did not know if he would listen, but she hoped. Mercer's herd grew, and by autumn, Larkspur Ranch was profitable again. He hired 3 hands, good men who worked hard and did not ask questions. Mirabelle taught a classroom of 15 students, most of whom adored her, and a few of whom tested her patience daily. She loved it, and every evening, she rode home to the ranch, to the man who waited for her by the door, and felt a peace she had never thought possible. They talked about building a larger house, about starting a family, about the years stretching ahead. But mostly, They just lived. Lived without fear, without secrets, without the weight of lies pressing down. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. One evening in late autumn, as the first snow began to fall, Mirabel and Mercer sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the white flakes drift down over the valley. "Do you ever regret it?" Mercer asked quietly. "Staying here. Fighting for this place." Mirabel looked at him, at the strong line of his jaw, the steady warmth in his dark eyes. "Not for a single moment," she said. "And you?" Mercer smiled, the rare, genuine smile that still took her breath away. "Never." He pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow cover the land they had fought so hard to keep. Mirabel rested her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body against hers. She had spent so many years running from her past, hiding from the world, afraid to be seen. But here, now, with Mercer beside her and the ranch stretching out beneath the falling snow, she was not hiding anymore. She was home. And she was never leaving again. Winter came in full, blanketing Larkspur Ranch in white silence. Mirabel and Mercer worked together through the cold months, repairing fences, tending the herd, keeping the fires burning. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms, building a life that felt solid and real. In January, Eleanor Voss sent word that the railroad had abandoned its western spur plan entirely, citing cost overruns and political pressure. The threat was truly over. Mirabel cried when she read the letter, not from fear this time, but from relief so profound it left her shaking. Mercer held her until she stopped, his hand steady and warm. By February, Mirabel knew she was pregnant. She told Mercer one evening by the fire, her voice tentative, almost afraid to hope. He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you happy?" she whispered against his chest. Mercer's voice was rough with emotion. "I have never been happier in my entire life." They planned for the baby through the late winter and early spring, turning the small guest room into a nursery, buying supplies in town, preparing for the future they had barely dared to imagine. Mirabel continued teaching until the school term ended in May, then took the summer to rest and prepare. Mercer hovered, protective and nervous, until Mirabel laughingly told him to stop treating her like fragile glass. The baby was born in late summer, a healthy boy with dark hair and his father's steady eyes. They named him Samuel, after Mercer's father, and Mirabel held him in her arms and wept with joy. This, she thought, was what she had been running toward all along. Not safety, not hiding, but this. Love. Family. Home. Years passed. The ranch prospered. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved horses and followed his father everywhere. Mirabel returned to teaching part-time, and the community that had once shunned her now welcomed her back. Eleanor Voss lived to see her 92nd birthday, sharp and opinionated to the end. Mirabel's brother visited once, awkward and uncertain, but grateful. He stayed a week, got to know Mercer, and left promising to write more often. He did, and Mirabel, who had spent so long running from her past, finally made peace with it. She could not change where she came from, but she could choose where she went. She had chosen love. She had chosen Mercer. She had chosen to stay and fight and build something worth keeping. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and Samuel was asleep and the fire burned low, she would sit beside her husband and look out over the land they had fought so hard to protect. It was theirs, all of it, the good and the bad, the struggle and the joy, the past and the future. Together, always together. And that, Mirabelle knew, was more than she had ever dared